Ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely happy to be able to be with you this evening because I've just published a new book and it's quite exciting. It's called A Memoir-Essay on Literary Dialogue and Two Verse Dialogues with Goethe's newly translated lyrics of Love and Travel, Roman Elegies, and Venetian Epigrams. Goethe is Germany's greatest poet. He's the author of Faust, Germany's greatest poem. It took him 60 years to write it, and it's sometimes a little hard to figure out what the thing is trying to say as a unity, because a unity that spreads over 60 years contains perhaps a troubling amount also of multiplicity and things that don't quite fit. So I'm interested in what might unify the work of Goethe, and I discovered a unifier in a most unusual place. Goethe explains it very well. Let me just sum up what I learned. My translation of two verse collections by Germany's greatest poet, the Roman poems and the Venetian poems, will be in part 2 of the book. First, though, in part 1, I want to show you how I used Goethe's lifelong outlook to coach me on the theory and practice of dialogue. In what the German poet calls his own personal religion, he invented a story filled with meaning for me. So my memoir essay will present this new symbolic narrative where we learn about the needed alternation of selving and unselving to stimulate a life of dialogue. Goethe is such an interesting person. In his autobiography called Poetry and Truth, which has a rather random structure, he fitted this in a quite unnoticeable place with no special heading, and yet I think it's the central key to his thought, his what he calls his own religion. He also fills you in on an interesting thing about his youthful reading. He loved to read about world religions, and he especially enjoyed, you can guess perhaps why, some of the reasons why, but he liked to read what he calls what have traditionally been called heretical religions, ones not officially approved by some governing body. And after reading all sorts of things about religion and learning just how many of them there are, he said to himself, why can't everybody have his or her or his own religion? And so, as he put it, I made one up. And so I'm going to talk about that, and then I'll go on to offer a 6-line poem by Goethe, which I find elaborates the myth. All right. Let's begin now with, according to Goethe's own youthful religion, Lucifer represents contraction, opacity, and self-affirmation, while the Trinity, whom Goethe prefers to call the Elohim. Elohim is a biblical term for God, but he likes the plural look of it. Im at the end is the Hebrew way to indicate plurality and suggest that maybe originally the word had been used to mean more than one God. In any case, Goethe likes to incorporate things from all sorts of other traditions, like Judaism and Christianity. And here he is telling us that Lucifer, in his own new religion, represents contraction, opacity, and self-affirmation, while the Trinity, whom he calls the Elohim, stand for expansion, translucence, and self-transcendence. In this heterodox account, that is unconventional, of Genesis, Lucifer was repaid for his exclusion from the Trinity, since 3 is the perfect number to which none can be added. I wonder why that is thought. Maybe it's because it's the number of father, mother, and child, something like that. But anyway, he was repaid for his exclusion from the Trinity, Lucifer was, by being instructed with the responsibility for creating the other angels, plus a whole universe of his own. Understandably, Lucifer, in his pride, you knew that was going to happen, began to think of himself as a god. He simply, I'll quote Goethe now, forgot his origin and believed he found that origin in himself. And from this first ingratitude arose all that seems to us not to correspond to the thinking and intentions of the deity. The more he now concentrated himself in himself, the worse he must have felt. From this concentration of the entire creation, for it had gone forth from Lucifer, and had to follow him, arose all that we perceive under the form of matter, and what we represent to ourselves as heavy, solid, and dark, but which, since it stems, if not immediately, still through filiation, from the divine being, is just as unconditionally mighty and eternal as its father Lucifer and its grandparents, the Trinity or Elohim. Yet the better half was indeed lacking in this creation, for it had all that is won through concentration, selving, but lacked all that can be gained through expansion, unselving. Lacked all that can be gained through expansion, and so through continuing concentration, centering, drawing inward. On the whole, creation might have eradicated itself, annihilated itself together with its father Lucifer, and lost all its claims to an equal eternity with the divinity. This is rather suspenseful, isn't it? He claims to have been quite young when he thought all this up, but Goethe explains it very, very clearly. Lucifer, I translated this, and I found it easy to do. Lucifer could have imploded himself and all his works out of existence, but luckily the Elohim in their expansive wisdom filled the entire gap that the success of Lucifer's action had brought with it. They gave the infinite being the capacity to expand himself, to move toward them. The authentic pulse of life then was restored, and Lucifer himself could not evade its effect. This is the epoch when what we call life came forth. This is a little bit before the let there be light. Goethe fills you in. And when what we are accustomed to designate as creation began. Man was created to bridge, that is, mankind, humankind, was created to bridge more completely the rift between Lucifer and the Trinity or Elohim, but it did not take very long for humankind as well to play fully the role of Lucifer. And now here's an interesting thing. Separation, says Goethe, from the benefactor is the real ingratitude, and so that fall was made manifest for the second time. Fall of Lucifer, or the devil, as he became known later, and fall of Adam and Eve. Fall made manifest for the second time, although, and these are Goethe's words, remember, the whole creation was and is nothing but a falling away and a returning to the original. That's what the universe is all about, a falling away and a returning to the original. The Elohim took on the exemplary form of Jesus to help right the balance once again. And the moral of the whole story is that we find ourselves in a condition which, if it seems to pull us down and to oppress us, nonetheless gives us the opportunity, even makes it a duty, to raise ourselves up and thereby to fulfill the intentions of the divinity, so that while on the one hand we are constrained to selve, uns zu verselbsten. On the other hand, we may not neglect to unselve, uns zu entselbstigen, in regular pulses. I quoted the German there because I want to show you I'm being authentic in the translation. If you think that selving and unselving are unusual words, you bet they are. I've never seen them in English before, and when I read this in German, I had never seen them in that language either. But they're crucial to the Goethe story. What an extraordinary imaginative interpretation of the Genesis narrative. Unselving, selving and unselving are the imaginative breathing of our mental lives. What has been equally influential on my thought and imagining is a little lyric that Goethe composed on the act of breathing. Because the regular pulses he has just mentioned are so very like those of human breathing, if we combine the new religion with the elucidating lyric, I haven't ever seen this done before, but I think the combination is what set me off for 21 years of dialogue writing. I think we'll have a basis for claiming Goethe as the originator of a moral psychology of breathing. Healthy breathing is the paradigm, the pattern, the model for a healthy mental and moral life. So now, the final part, let's look for a moment at Goethe's breathing poem. Once again, not ostentatiously positioned, highlighted, or featured in any way, but just one of the number poems, number 5, in the brief lyric that goes under the heading Talismans in the book West-East Divan. It was really great to not only to translate this, but to try to embody it in my life. 2 graces of competing kinds, one in the feat of breathing finds. Pressured, breathe in. Breathe out, refreshed. How well are life's strengths intermeshed. So thank the Lord when you are stressed, and thank him when he grants you rest. To derive from these 6 lines a moral psychology of breathing, just think of inhaling as selving, taking in oxygen to further your own life and self, and then of exhaling as unselving, breathing out to distribute the carbon dioxide to the world, where it might, for example, be absorbed by a tree that will convert it back to life-giving oxygen through photosynthesis. Breathing is selving and unselving, stress and unstress, relaxation. The stress of inhaling and the relaxation of exhaling are 2 additional kinds of grace or favor keeping us physically healthy. The stress of selving and the relaxation of unselving are 2 kinds of grace or favor keeping us morally and mentally healthy. The healthy effects, literal and metaphoric, of inhaling and exhaling, selving and unselving, self-assertion and self-renunciation, self-affirmation and self-transcendence. All of these are equivalent pairs of contraries, all of them good and necessary for life, for breathing, may be called attaining health by maintaining a balanced dialogue. In Goethe's religion, Lucifer learns to practice the salubrious regimen or routine, and in a happy human life we do the same. Goethe's new myth, combined with his new lyric formulation regarding the 2 graces of breathing, encapsulates an ethic and an aesthetic of dialogue. How does the mind-mapping project allow Goethe to demonstrate moral breathing in Faust? Oh, this is fun, because here I think I have stumbled upon the key to a really exciting, unifying perspective that will take that poem, Faust. It's actually an epic scale drama, 60 years in the writing, that will take it and unify it in a surprising and interesting way. The initial conflict between Faust and the devil, who for some reason is called Mephistopheles, that's a mysterious word to every critic I've ever looked at, between, in other words, Faust and Mephistopheles, passion versus skepticism that drives part 1 of the epic drama, proves unfruitful. The seduction of Gretchen, carried out by Faust with his false comrade's help, was a tragedy. To generate psychological progress through life-giving and not deadly tensions meant that in part 2, Goethe would cancel or overrule this Faust versus Mephisto polarity as a structuring principle for his poem. That didn't work. Part 1 was a tragedy. Let's spend the next few decades, thought Goethe, writing part 2. That's really exciting. Instead, in a wonderfully new visionary broadening of perspective, the poet introduces homunculus, or intuition, and the eternal feminine, or creative love. Faust's driving passion will be countered in vital tension with the more passive learning, the richly sensitive, welcoming intuition of homunculus. Mephisto's corrosive intellection meets a countervailing, contrasting power in the eternal feminine's creative love. Faust and Homunculus face each other along what I'd call the axis of emotion, while Mephisto faces the eternal feminine along the axis of creativity. In each case, the polar face-offs appear fruitful, not mutually damaging or destructive. What's established is a dialogue, a conversation, not a mutual negation. We can add that the two axes, the axis of emotion and the axis of creativity, are also in productive colloquy or dialogue. Well, so, fourfold unity. It's like what William Blake achieved in his poem, The Four Zoas, in which all of the characters state or believe quite candidly. It's one of them in particular that comes forth and says it, for we live, all of us, within the human mind. There are four characters in Blake's poem, The Four Zoas. They represent your reason. In fact, his name is Urizen. And then there's another one called Luva, which could be lover or lava or lava, and he represents passion. And then there's Tharmas, who's compassion or compassionate intuition, very like the test tube baby homunculus, who falls in love with love goddess Galatea and shatters his test tube against the vessel in which she is standing. And then what else do we have? Yes, and then the eternal feminine has to try to redeem Mephisto. That's not an easy thing, and people have argued endlessly about whether the unification in Faust has been successful or not. Whatever else it's done, it has stimulated endless amounts of conversation and what we say, speculation on what is necessary for human physical life as well as mental life, selving and unselving, and the regular alternation of the two in the harmonious action that we call breathing. Thank you.